Infrastructure. It is a big word for a big thing. The basic physical and organisational structures and facilities needed for the operation of society or an enterprise is how the dictionary defines it. And it encompasses roads and buildings and people and systems and power and internet connectivity, all the bits and pieces, seen and unseen, that make a complex, large society possible. A lot of those things are 99% invisible, at least when they work. And it's a topic we've talked about a fair bit here. We've chatted about how to pay for roads, how charging networks work, and how utilities are both embracing and rejecting the burgeoning home solar panel industry. And I know some of you are already hitting the thumb down button because we're going to be talking about the government and policy and all those things that some of you all seem to loathe and despise and see as somehow irrelevant to the discussion of transitioning away from fossil fuels. But the US federal bipartisan infrastructure bill that's currently in the news is enormously important. Not just for those of us in the US, but for those outside, partly because of the substantial influence the US has on world politics, but mainly because if the US finally starts to really invest in transport infrastructure, it has the potential to massively increase the uptake of electric vehicles. Large infrastructure builds have a long and often fraught history in the United States, from the projects that brought about the rural electrification to the building of the federal highway system, to the Public Works Administration, which was responsible for initiating and contracting out large infrastructure projects, like, for example, the Hoover Dam. And, as an aside, rural electrification, which actually made electric vehicles the vehicles of choice for going out into rural areas for a while, because most places had electricity somewhere in town, but who knew if they'd have a gas station? The more you know. I say these builds had a fraught history because, of course, infrastructure spending has always been something that has the potential to transiently increase the deficit. And particularly in the last decade, that's become an increasingly contentious issue. Whereas deficit increases are largely, to paint with a broad brush, acceptable to the self-proclaimed deficit hawks when they're cutting taxes, those self-same birds of prey find it unacceptable to enlarge the deficit by increasing public spending. Although fraught could equally be applied for another reason. A reason that can be well illustrated by the neighbourhood of Vinegar Hill in Charlottesville. The neighbourhood was once home to a variety of folks at a pretty wide variety of income levels. It was also home to a thriving small business economy. Tailors, barbers shops, a number of grocers. Over 30 businesses occupied that section of town. It wasn't an area without problems, but it was vibrant and it had a cohesive community. Come the 1960s, the area was razed to the ground as part of an urban renewal project, which then faltered, having displaced the community that lived there, leaving the area empty for years. Why? Because there, like in many places, highway projects were often deliberately and intentionally routed through affluent black and minority neighbourhoods to attempt to reinforce segregation using federal money, and to ensure the destruction of successful independent minority populations. And of course, to use eminent domain to obtain said land for far less than the land might actually have been worth, which further disenfranchised those citizens. To find out more about these, we've put a link up here, and we'll pop a link to a YouTube video down below. Despite that history, infrastructure development remains popular with the American public. And when it comes to infrastructure spending in the United States, pretty much every recent president has highlighted it as a priority, and both Republicans and Democrats support improving the impoverished state of American infrastructure. It's been difficult to maneuver a successful bill through Congress. And because I know it's going to come up in the comments, let's be clear that while President Trump unveiled a variety of infrastructure plans, his administration was unable to reach a bipartisan agreement about the contents of any infrastructure bill, and none made it to a vote. Which brings us to now, and the current bipartisan bill before the Senate. And while I'm writing this, there is already discussion of amendments when it might make it to a vote, and whether the House will agree to a Senate bill that's far more limited in scope than the already passed House infrastructure bill. If anything really substantial changes before we publish this video, then expect Future Kate to drop by and fill you in. Don't worry, Future Kate's already spent the required time living near the machine in Flin Flon, and she's pretty skilled with the tappers, so she's ready to drop back and edit the timeline if needed. As usual in politics. Oh. Hey Past Kate, you have news? Yeah, so I just wanted to let you know that the bill has passed the Senate pretty much intact. So that's great, and the video that we've recorded, we can use that pretty much as is. Excellent, so it's sorted then. No, it's not quite that simple. The House and the Senate bills need to be reconciled, and the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has said that she won't do that until the Senate passes the larger bill through reconciliation. Still a ways to go then. Yeah. Anyway, I best let you get back to editing. What's in the bill and why should you care? Well, let's start with a quick stat. Roughly 1 in 3 bridges in the US needs repair or replacement, and over 7% of bridges in the US are classified as structurally deficient. Not a good start, and the current bill provides $110 billion for roads and bridges, of which a chunk is carved out for specific bridge investment programs, which sounds pretty good. But then you find out that just repairing or replacing those bridges I mentioned will eat over $40 billion. And of the $110 billion, that's quite a big chunk. Which makes it more apparent why there's a strong push to pass a larger bill later. There's also $39 billion of investment in public transportation, including a chunk of money for separating out bus traffic through the building of bus corridors, redesigning intersections to speed public transport, building better bus stops, providing for a transition to clean school buses and transportation. There's $66 billion allocated for rail improvements. Digging into that a little reveals a big chunk going towards upgrades to the Northeast Corridor, one of the US's rare, high-speed, by American standards, electrified rail routes, and around $50 million per year to improve accessibility across the network. Incidentally, as an aside, if you ever wonder why bills are so long, I mean, this is over 2,000 pages long and you've never dug into one yourself, first up, remember that they're double-spaced, which was always a great trick at school to make an essay look longer. And also that bills often spend a lot of time amending previously passed legislation. Rather than simply state what they want to happen, they have exciting phrases like, quote, in paragraph bracket 1, by striking, quote, between crowded urban areas and other areas of, quote, and inserting, quote, throughout, quote, which makes trying to work out exactly what that section does without a team of staffers to assist you really rather challenging. Sometimes I wonder if that's intentional. Anyhow, there's money for water and wastewater infrastructure, airports, seaports, broadband internet, which is great because the US is ironically world-renowned for having terrible internet connectivity. And then there's the other bits we're super interested in. Renewable energy and charging infrastructure. While charging infrastructure has come a long way over the past few years, many people still find it a limiting factor in purchase decisions. Indeed, as I'm writing this script, a relative is going the PHEV route because they regularly drive out into areas which are poorly served by charging networks. The bill provides $2.5 billion for what it terms charging and fueling infrastructure. At the moment, that covers chargers with, quote, non-proprietary, i.e. not Tesla, connectors, hydrogen fueling stations, and much less positively, fossil natural gas stations and propane stations. In this, we get to see, it would seem, the impact of the lobbyist Richard Berman, who's been working hard to greenwash the fossil fuel-based natural gas. I can also feel some of our more enthusiastic Tesla supporters wanting to comment about how unfair it is that Tesla's penalised for not having a platform-agnostic charging network, especially on the back of Tesla not being even name-checked in President Biden's recent executive order, And it's certainly a difficult balancing act. Without Tesla's supercharger network, it's clear that we would not be near as far down the path to transition to clean transportation as we are. But while Teslas can, with adapters, use CCS and CHAdeMO infrastructure, until Tesla completes opening its supercharger network in the US and an adapter exists, or Tesla adds CCS charging cables to the superchargers to allow other manufacturer cars to charge at superchargers, the feds will not be funding expansion of Tesla's network. Whether that will focus Tesla on the task of opening up the network or rolling out new chargers with both Tesla and CCS charging cords, I don't know. But with $2.5 billion up for grabs over the next 5 years, it may be tempting. That said, the bill also requires equal access to chargers, which could be taken to be at odds with Tesla's suggestion that slower charging cars would be penalised at busier charging stations. Although slower charging could be platform agnostic, but I do not want to be the lawyer involved in the discussion about older Model S's with free supercharging and slow, fast charging by today's standards. An interesting quirk of the bill as it stands is that, presumably to ensure long-term accessibility, charging stations funded through the bill appear to be designated as part of the federal aid highway system. I haven't got to the bottom of whether that's a permanent designation or whether there's some other funding requirements reason for it. Again, whether that will impact Tesla's or indeed other independent charging networks' desire to use the funds is something that will be interesting to see. And whether that could be finicked into allowing charging networks to bypass prohibitions on installing networks in some states' rest areas, or to allow them to use other legal finagling to get permission to build where they normally might not, will also be interesting to see. For those of you wanting to dive in and check, it's hiding in section 11401, section F, 9A, just below the sign saying, "Beware of the leopard." While the bill is, overall, nowhere near as ambitious as was hoped for by the Democrats, nor as drownable in the bath as some Republicans would like, the necessity of dragging our crumbling infrastructure into the 21st century and attempting to prepare it for the challenges of anthropogenic climate change means that with each passing day, the necessity of passing an infrastructure bill has become more apparent. But what's also apparent is who's currently being excluded from those important negotiations. As Representative Cori Bush commented in a tweet, quote, "Is this the bipartisan infrastructure group or the audience at a Kid A rock concert?" Quote. The all-white and 75% male infrastructure group have put together legislation which, while it does cite the need for an equitable investment in infrastructure, is likely to be biased by their preconceptions of what historically disinvested communities need. And as we've seen countless times before, there's a real risk of the patriarchal empire-building mindset of "we know best" being unintentionally embedded in the legislation. That failure to involve people from diverse communities early on may lead to failure to meet the needs of those communities. Maybe there's a great car sharing scheme that would like an EV, but instead of getting a charging station at the car share reserved spaces, the charger is installed at some hipster foraged homebrew and artisanal avocado toast restaurant. Or it's installed in a parking lot that charges per hour fees that are unfeasible for those on fixed or low incomes. As the US negotiates the challenges of updating its infrastructure, while at the same time trying to overcome a history of legislation designed to disenfranchise and harm, there's a serious trust issue at stake. Why should BIPOC communities trust or engage with legislatures who have long promised to build an equitable future, but who have simultaneously failed to listen to those most impacted? Without an intersectional approach where all impacted stakeholders are in the room, it's likely to fail, and that seems to be a lesson that isn't being learned. That all being said, even with its compromises, this is a big bill. To put this in context, as it stands right now, the bill is roughly equivalent to 1/4 of the New Deal spending that made the US the star at the top of the infrastructure quality tree. With just this bill, we might be able to claw back some of the marked degradation in the quality of US infrastructure that we've seen over the past few decades. if the administration truly engages with impacted folks and Democrats maneuver their second bill through reconciliation, that has the potential to truly impact our trajectory towards a sustainable, livable future on this planet. Whether that will happen, that remains to be seen. That's it for today. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and our other two channels, Transport Evolved Take 2 and Transport Evolved Shorts. We know that while a fair few of you are already subscribed, many more aren't. So go on, hit the bell and help us out. Let us know below what you thought of this video, either down in the comments section or on our Discord server. It's free and we'll leave the link below, but however you choose to do it, remember, play nice. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month patrons. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons Andrew Martin, Guido Drahoa, Brophy Wolf, Anonymous Freak, Regine Fellows, Kyle Hodgson, Gordon C., Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, and Anthony Coates, Denny Hyde, Sean Ada, and Tezza in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month patron supporters. That's John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylan, and Ian. If you'd like to join the ranks of wonderful supporters, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin and Ko-fi, and of course you can buy your very own TE swag at our Redbubble store. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving.